Welcome to Women Who Kick Class, the podcast that dives into the fearless women who changed history and the fights that are still shaping our world today. From suffragists to civil rights activists, these women refuse to back down, breaking barriers and demanding change. And now, here's your host, an advocate, a storyteller, and a woman who kicks class herself, Ann Potenza.
Mary Church Terrell was a well-known African-American activist who championed racial equity and women's suffrage. She was a civil rights activist, a journalist, a teacher, and one of the first African-American women to earn a college degree. Mary fought for women's suffrage and civil rights because she realized that she belonged to the only group in this country that had two huge obstacles to surmount, both race and sex. At the 1890 National Women's Suffrage Association Convention, Mary brought attention to the dual burden faced by Black women by saying, "A white woman has only one handicap to overcome. True, it's a great one, but it's her sex. A colored woman faces two, her sex and her race." Mary was born in 1863 in Memphis, Tennessee, and she was the daughter of two freed slaves of mixed racial ancestry. That was also the same year of the Emancipation Proclamation, so Mary was part of a changing America. Her father was a businessman who became one of the first Black millionaires in the American South and also an influential member of the Republican Party. And after the Civil War, her mother owned a hair salon, which also helped give her family financial security. When Mary was 8 years old, her parents sent her to Antioch College's model school in Ohio, and while she was there, she was also tutored in German. After she graduated high school, she attended Oberlin College and enrolled in the 4-year gentleman's course instead of the 2 years ladies course, even though she was warned that if she was overeducated, she may not find a husband. But she still completed the 4-year gentleman's course where she was able to also study Latin and Greek. While she was at Oberlin, Mary was elected the freshman class poet, edited the school newspaper, and was also a member of the Women's Club. She earned both a Bachelor of Arts degree and a Master of Arts degree, and even studied abroad in Europe for 2 years. Mary became part of the rising Black middle and upper class that used their position to help fight against racial discrimination. In 1887, she moved to Washington, D.C. to teach Latin at the M Street Colored High School, which was the very first African-American high school in the nation. From studying abroad, Mary was fluent in Italian, German, and French. And eventually her alma mater, Oberlin College, offered her a registrarship position, which would have made her the very first African-American to be in that position, but she declined. That same year, she married her husband and was forced to resign as a teacher from the M Street High School because that's where her husband taught too. Although Mary's life continued to focus on education and progress, it was personal tragedy that spurred her into activism. It was in 1892 when her childhood friend was lynched by whites in Memphis, Tennessee, because he had a business that competed with theirs. Thomas was the owner of a successful wholesale grocery store called People's Grocery outside the city. And he, like Mary, represented progress. And many whites at the time viewed that as a direct threat to their commerce and their livelihood. So after the murder of her friend Thomas Moss, Mary joined Ida B. Wells in organizing anti-lynching campaigns. Mary met many influential African-American activists of her day, like Booker T. Washington and Frederick Douglass. She met Frederick when she was still a student at Oberlin College, and she worked together with him on many civil rights campaigns. One of the campaigns they worked on was for Black individuals who were not receiving due process of law in certain states. And at one point, when Mary was considering retiring from activism to pursue family life, it was Frederick who persuaded her to stay in public life because he said that her talents were too great to not be used. Frederick inspired Mary because she saw him as someone who could inspire the next generation of Black youth. And before he passed away in 1895, the two of them worked together, and Mary carried on his legacy by establishing a Frederick Douglass Day that would highlight the global achievements of Black people and dispel the myths of Black inferiority. When D.C. officials appointed Mary to the Board of Education in 1895, she was the first Black woman to be appointed in this position. And while she was on the board, she used her position to help create Frederick Douglass Day, which became established 2 years later in the Black schools in Washington, D.C. By creating Frederick Douglass Day and her efforts to spread Black history during the 19th century, Mary was instrumental in helping to shape what we now know as Black History Month. It was her passion for educating Black students and honoring the achievements of Black leaders that helped her fuel her desire to spread Black history. Mary joined Ida B. Wells and other notable Black women activists to form the Colored Women's League in Washington, D.C. The goals of this service-oriented club was to promote unity, social progress, and the best interests of the African American community. The Colored Women's League really aided in elevating the lives of educated African American women, and they eventually joined together with another similar organization to become the National Association of Colored Women, which became the first national organization dedicated to the livelihoods of African American women. Their motto was "Lifting as we Climb," which aimed to create solidarity among Black women while combating racial discrimination. Among many accomplishments, some of the most notable was that they created day nurseries and kindergartens for Black children. And Mary, of course, also served as president of the organization more than once. As president, Mary campaigned tirelessly, writing and speaking extensively not only at Black organizations, but at white organizations as well. She also actively embraced women's suffrage, seeing it as essential to elevating the status of not only Black women, but the entire race. Not only was Mary an avid suffragist while she was a student at Oberlin College, but even after she graduated, she remained active in the suffragist circles at the National American Women's Suffrage Association. Even though Mary became friends with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton in this organization, she was still only one of the few African Americans allowed to attend meetings. So she used her position in this organization to directly speak out against the injustices and issues of the African American community. And in 1898, at their biannual session in Washington, D.C., she gave an address called "The Progress of Colored Women," which was a call of action for the NAWSA to fight for the lives of Black women. But it was in a later speech called "What It Means to Be an African American in the Capital of the U.S." that really highlights her own personal struggles as an African American woman in Washington, D.C. This is part of that speech. For 15 years, I have resided in Washington, and while it was far from being a paradise for colored people, when I first touched these shores, it has been doing its level best ever since to make conditions for us intolerable. As a colored woman, I might enter Washington any night, a stranger in a strange land, and walk miles without finding a place to lay my head. Unless I happen to know colored people who live here or ran across a chance acquaintance who could recommend a colored boarding house to me, I should be obliged to spend the entire night wandering about. She goes on to say, as a colored woman, I may walk from the Capitol to the White House, ravenously hungry and abundantly supplied with money with which to purchase a meal, without finding a single restaurant in which I would be permitted to take a morsel of food if it was patronized by white people, unless I were willing to sit behind a screen. As a colored woman, I cannot visit the tomb of the father of this country, which owes its very existence to the love of freedom in the human heart and which stands for equal opportunity to all, without being forced to sit in the Jim Crow section of an electric car which starts from the very heart of the city, midway between the Capitol and the White House. If I refuse thus to be humiliated, I am cast into jail and forced to pay a fine for violating the Virginia laws. Every hour in the day, Jim Crow cars filled with colored people, many of whom are intelligent and well-to-do, enter and leave the national capital. And in her summation, she says, "It is impossible for any white person in the United States, no matter how sympathetic and broad, to realize what life would mean to him if his incentive to effort were suddenly snatched away. To the lack of incentive to effort, which is the awful shadow under which we live, may be traced the wreck and ruin of scores of colored youth. And surely nowhere in the world do oppression and persecution based solely on the color of the skin appear more hateful and hideous than in the capital of the United States, because the chasm between the principles upon which this government was founded, in which it still professes to believe, and those which are daily practiced under the protection of the flag, yawns so wide and deep." And what adds to the injustice of what she shared back then is that we see these same injustices today, right now. Mary was one of the fortunate suffragists that got to see the 19th Amendment passed in 1920, and she was able to exercise her right to vote. And even with that, at 86 years old, she still had to fight segregation in the 1950s against restaurants in Washington, D.C. She was one of the protesters challenging segregation at the John R. Thompson restaurant in Washington, D.C. And she was victorious when in 1953 the Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional for eating facilities to be segregated, which was a major breakthrough in the civil rights movement. And it was with Ida B. Wells that Mary was one of the 2 African American women invited to join the founding membership of the NAACP. Mary also lived long enough to see the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus the Board of Education, which held that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. She passed away 2 months later at the age of 90 in 1954. Mary believed that education and activism would carve a pathway for equality. A self-described dignified agitator, Mary would fight, protest, and work on behalf of women of color for more than half a century. In her memoir, Mary wrote, "The National Women's Party, led by Alice Paul, used to picket the White House in the afternoon. On a bitter cold day, the phone would ring and a voice from headquarters would inquire, 'Will you come to picket the White House this afternoon?' As a rule, I complied with the request, and several times my daughter Phyllis would come with me to swell the number. Sometimes it was necessary to stand on hot bricks supplied by a colored man employed expressly for that purpose to keep our feet from freezing." Mary was very proud of her daring picketing, but she also noted how lucky she was. The one time she missed her post was the time they rounded up and sent the women to prison. Another daring protest by Mary was within the women's suffrage movement. In the 1913 Women's March on Washington, Black suffragists were originally excluded from the march, but then an invitation was extended, however, segregating them to walk at the end of the parade. Mary and Ida did not listen, and they fought to integrate in the march, which they did, and they marched with the delegates of New York City to which they belonged. Mary Church Terrell faced significant challenges due to her identity as a Black woman in a discriminatory society. She experienced racism, sexism, and ageism, especially in her pursuit of education, employment, and social justice. But these challenges fueled her lifelong commitment to activism. Mary's legacy continues to impact society today. Her dedication to social reform and her courage in the face of adversity serve as an enduring model for activists and organizers working for equality and justice today. Her advocacy for women's rights continues to influence the ongoing right for gender equality and women's empowerment. Her advocacy for civil rights have inspired generations of activists working to dismantle systemic racism and achieve racial justice. Her commitment for uplifting African Americans through education and community development continues to be relevant in addressing disparities in access to quality education and social opportunities. And her philosophy of lifting as we climb, which emphasizes collective action and empowerment. This motto continues to resonate with modern movements seeking to empower the marginalized groups and advocate for social change. And finally, her influence on Black History Month. Mary's efforts to promote Black history and culture, including her co-founding of Frederick Douglass Day, plays a significant role in shaping the broader understanding and celebration of Black History Month. Thank you for joining me in learning a little bit about the life and legacy of Mary Church Terrell. If her story inspires you, I invite you to share this episode, start a discussion, and please join us next week when we dive into the life of another amazing suffragist. I'm Ann Potenza, and until then, keep kicking glass.
Thanks for listening to Women Who Kick Glass. Be sure to follow and subscribe so you never miss an episode. To learn more, contact the show. Visit womenwhokickglass.com. Until next time, keep kicking glass.